today with whole plant water relations. We're going to talk about root pressure and start talking about movement of water. Then we're going to go into water potential, and then I'm going to come back a little bit to the lecture we're covering now. I like to cover the physical part of it, go into the physics, then back to the more physical stuff. And you guys know, remember I've said over and over again that I'll be talking about the same thing multiple times. And so you guys know that xylem is the tissue that moves most of the water in the plant. And now we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about xylem. And xylem consists of several different kinds of tissues. First, there are fibers, and fibers are a good bit of wood. And so a fiber is a cell type that helps keep a tree standing up, in addition is a part of the xylem. They also have something called xylem parenchyma. Okay, what's a parenchyma cell? Anybody remember? What?
Ground tissue.
Ground tissue, basic, undifferentiated tissue. So the dead xylem also has a living parenchyma area that sort of supplies it with some stuff that it needs when it's developing. Okay?
Like nutritional benefits?
Mainly when the xylem is actually growing.
Okay.
And then, and it's like wood does not have any parenchyma in the wood. Okay? But like in a leaf or in a stem, there'll be a little bit of parenchyma cell next to the xylem. Okay? Trachea elements are either tracheids or tracheids and vessel elements, and this is where the water actually moves. So basically, you've got a pipe surrounded by pipe. You have pipe that you've got cement pipe. It's got rebar. It's got cellulose in there, and then it's got the cement on it, the lignin, and then surrounding that is some cells that are just basically massive amounts of lignin. Okay, and that's what wood is. And then over time, of course, the xylem matures and then goes away, and you get new ones. Okay, a little bit more detail now. I just put that in the wrong place. So here's a little more details from the book. This is, by the way, from now on, this will be the figure numbers. And you see they're going to be pretty complex. And that they also have this very, very, very detailed structure where this pit can actually move back and forth. Think of about almost like a pressure plate. So water pressure can move here and it can cause it to sort of warp this way. You'll notice that this is the secondary cell wall, and what we have reduced down is to the primary cell wall. And then this aperture, or an area which can go away, but usually this helps regulate water, and it'll make a little more sense later. So these can be very intricate. These pits can be here, and so we can have some movement of water across. So if you think about it, you've got thousands of these straws going up, and if these are contiguous, water can move up here, then it can go here, and it can go up, and then it can move back here. So the water that's found at the bottom of the tree doesn't move straight up. It can move through all of these xylem elements. So they've got holes on the side. They've got regulated holes on the side. Now, what happens, this again is how it's formed, is you have the cell is very actively metabolically, and then we start to see the middle lamella. Remember what the middle lamella is? It actually starts to sort of expand a little bit, and as the secondary cell wall then is laid down, and then the middle lamella basically goes away, and we're ended with, in this case, a simple perforation, which means this cell is no more, and now we have this thing that will conduct water, which really looks like this thing, okay? And there are all kinds, there are actually different kinds of these trachea and vessel elements. So it's not just a straight opening from the bottom to the top. Remember, there's also secondary cell wall thickenings. Now, how do we move stuff up in the tree? And that's what we're going to be talking about today and Wednesday. No matter what, no matter how much vacuum you add to a column of water, you can't pull the water up to the top of a tallest tree. So if you have the strongest vacuum pump you can have, and you put it hundreds of feet up in the air, you'll start pulling the water up, and you'll keep pulling the water up, but the water will not end up coming to the top. What happens to that water? Anybody know? First, you got the gravity of the water pulling down on it. The water you reduce the atmospheric pressure to the point of where the water boils. You know, you've all seen water boil at room temperature, right? The trick where you put water in a bale jar and you hook up a vacuum and the water turns into a gas at room temperature. Okay? So transpiration, the loss of water from the leaf cannot contribute, cannot explain, the vacuum produced by that cannot explain the movement of water. So we've got a lot of things going on. And we're going to talk about three different things. One thing is root pressure, which will be one of your take-home questions on the second exam, and capillarity, which is important, and we'll talk about it a little bit today and Wednesday, and then the cohesion theory or the cohesion tension theory. Now, here is just a cartoon of no matter what, if we put a pressure in here, if we put a positive pressure, we can only move the water so much. If we pull it up with a negative pressure, we can't pull the water up as far as it needs to go. Now here's something you may have seen, and we'll see this again, called a thistle tube. And at the bottom of this thistle tube is a membrane that only allows water to flow through. This is a semi-permeable membrane, and you all know what I'm getting to, which is osmosis. And we'll talk about osmosis in detail either later today or Wednesday. And what we are seeing here is work being done. If we take this, and I would love to get a thistle tube. I don't think they make them anymore. If we fill this thistle tube with a syrup solution and we put it in pure water, then everybody knows what osmosis is. Osmosis is the movement of water from a higher water potential to a lower water potential. What's the water potential of pure water? You need to know this. What is it? Pure water is 0. So we're going to always move, and this is the first piece of this water potential puzzle that we'll be talking about, so we're actually, if we have pure water here, and we have a lower concentration of water here, then water will actually move in, and look what it's doing. It's actually bringing the water up above the level. Okay? So it's actually doing some work here. By the water moving in, it's actually pushing the water up. Does that make sense to you? Now, if I were to put a hole in here, then this water column would fall right back down to here. Okay? This is what a root does. This is a root. And water is flowing in to the root, and the root actually pushes water up by something called root pressure, which we'll talk about. Now, how does it do this? This is a question that was asked sometime last week, I think. Is that we have a very complex structure, series of structures in the phloem, and we go down and see. Yeah, let's go back up here. And so here we have the central stele of the root, where we have the xylem, okay, and the phloem, little tiny small cells are the phloem and the xylem. And then out here somewhere is the outside of the root. Then we have these just parenchyma or root cells. And what I want to show you now, and then we'll talk about it, is let's make water blue. So we can have water moving in like this. I guess we can't for some reason. Anyway. And I could draw, maybe this will work. So we can have water moving, let's say, out here in, and the water can move in here, then it can go into the cell, then it can move in, it can move out of the cell. Same thing, the water can be in here, it can move in, and it can move in. So we have water moving between the cells, and then water also moves into and out of the cells, okay? Until we get to this layer right here. And this layer, this little pink layer, is found in the endodermis. And remember, the endodermis is the layer between the pericycle and the rest of the root. And what the endodermis has is waterproof sides. Okay? So it's hard to see this, but this stops movement. In other words, the water moves here, it hits here, it can't move past that waterproof layer, so the water has to go into the cell and move in, okay? The tops and sides are waterproofed, so if I can try to do perspective here, the water moves that way, okay? So this forces water to get into the middle of the root to move through a membrane, move through a cell, okay? Questions? Does that make sense to you? So the water can move from outside. So the water can move basically any way out here, which is what you want. You want maximum amount of water to get in here. But this now is turned on its side. So only the sides, the top and sides are waterproofed, and water can still move through here. And that generates that pressure. I'm sorry? I guess it could, yeah. I guess it could. Now I can't get it to go to the next slide. Wait, should be. Anyway, so root pressure then moves water into the center through the Casparian band or Casparian strip. Suberin, of course, is wax. This allows the root to actually push water up. Okay, so that's force water, or force one. Water is pushed up. Again, to repeat myself, it's important that you understand that this turns this thing into an osmometer. And indeed, we can actually take a plant, cut the plant off, and put a tube in it with some mercury, and we can measure the force. So if we water this plant, then it's actually going to push water up, and we can actually measure that. And one of the questions you'll have on your second exam is this phenomena called guttation, okay? And this is something that, again, you'll read about. It's pretty common. And it's basically when root pressure pushes water all the way out of the top of the plant. That makes sense. Now, this will only go so far. So, we're pushing water up from the bottom because when we water the plant, water the roots, water moves in, moves up a little bit, but not far. And then on the other end, we have tension. Okay, tension is negative negative pressure. I'm sorry, I'm still having a problem. So in other words, we've got a vacuum, a partial vacuum pulling the water up. So we're pumping the water up in the root from the bottom, and then we have part of a vacuum pulling the water up. Okay? So at any given time, the xylem normally is under a negative pressure. So it's under what is called a tension. It's under a negative pressure. Then another factor that comes into play and is very, very important is something called capillarity or capillarity if you're from England, and has to do with adhesion of the water molecules. Okay? So xylem elements are not very wide. They're very, very thin. And you know that capillary action or capillary force is due to the water molecules binding to themselves and binding to another surface. Adhesion is when the water binds to the other surface. Okay? And if we go back here real quickly, these are very thin, and remember they have, a lot of times they have these secondary rings. So if you take a pipe and then put a spring inside it, you've increased the surface area immensely, and that increases the capillarity and helps pull the water up. You probably have all, well, you don't do it anymore. Do you do it anymore? Do they ever prick your finger and take a little blood sample with one of those little thin tubes? That's capillarity. Get that incredibly thin tube, they prick your finger, put the tube, and the blood comes up because the water in the blood is adhering to the glass. Okay? Okay? And then there's also surface tension, which is a component of it. And anyway, this all goes into something called the cohesion theory. It's also called the cohesion tension theory. And it's basically due to the evaporation of water and also due to something that's really interesting, which is the tensile strength of water. Anybody know what the tensile strength of anything is? You always see, if you watch any of these, yeah, how strong it is before it breaks. If if you watch these why things fail, they'll have a piece of metal and they'll put this piece of metal in an instrument and they'll pull the metal until the metal breaks apart. That's the tensile strength. Well, guess what? Water has an amazingly strong tensile strength because of hydrogen bonding. So water moves up as a continuous column. It moves up from the inside of the root all the way to when it evaporates in the leaf mesophyll as a continuous stream of water molecules. And that's a big, big deal in movement of water. It doesn't move up as small bits of water. Okay? Now, so what happens when, let's say, the plant's not watered, it's hot, what's going to be the rate of transpiration? It's going to be high, right? So the plant is losing water faster than, the xylem is losing water faster than it's taking it up. So what happens is there can actually be an area of the cell that forms that cavitates. In other words, the water boils. And you have a little air bubble created. The pressure is reduced and it goes pop. And in fact, I don't know if they're still doing this work. There was some work done at one point. It makes a pop. It pops. So they were taking very sensitive microphones and hooking them up to plants to see if when if the soil started drying out, the xylem started cavitating, pop, 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 then could they use that to turn the watering on? And so what happens when this occurs, so you're losing water, the water is still being sucked up the stem, sucked up the xylem, and the pressure is reduced to such a point that you get an air bubble. That's bad news. With an air bubble, the water can no longer move this way. Water cannot move through air. So the water, though, can go through these pits and move sideways and move back, okay? So as a plant starts to dry and the root is now, there's not much root pressure, there may not be any root pressure, there's still water being pulled up in a continuous stream up to the top of the plant, and the pressure is reduced to the point where it pops, produces an embolism, okay? And this is called an embolism. Now, there's some thought that and I'll show you in a couple of slides, that in most instances this can be recovered, but it's not good. It does, if you have a lot of these, you're very quickly reducing the amount of xylem that can transport water. So if it's hot and dry, that's when you're going to be losing the most water by transpiration, right? So that's when this is going to occur the most. So the actual one reason why wheat leaves wilt is to actually lower transpiration. It's to help the plant not use as much water as it should. Okay? So if we look at these border pits, remember we go back here real quickly. These are these border pits, these structures. These border pits they basically change the pressure and allow the water to move around. So as this occurs, you do get a little bit of reduction in water, but you still have a lot of xylem to move a lot of water around. Okay? Now, there's a proposal, there's this hypothesis that called the design leakage hypothesis, is that they use cavitation as a mechanism to help control water loss. So if you stop the water from moving to the leaf wilts, and that's not good, but it's better than the water continuously being lost from the leaf. So you cut the water off, wilting occurs faster. Okay. Anybody ever read about submarines and cavitation? It's a big thing when a submarine moves through the water. It's moving so fast that the water molecules right at the surface will boil. And that's the way submarines are heard, is by the popping noises. And so most of the submarines are designed to eliminate the boiling of water, the popping of the water as the pressure is reduced. So now we're going to talk about the uptake of water by roots. We're going to finish up on roots. And there's some obvious things about roots. They keep the plant from falling over. And they store carbohydrates, and a lot of roots are used just to store energy during when the plant's not green. They do, of course, synthesize some hormones, and they are the site of most uptake of water and minerals. Uptake of water is primarily at the tips of roots, where they're very thin. And it's in this thing called the water is the zone of maturation, which is basically this is a cross-section of basically a root. And you can see where most of the root takes up water. So here is in this, what they call, this is the zone of maturation. And it's not drawn here, but this is where a lot of the root hairs would be. What's the purpose of a root hair? Increase surface area, uptake more water. And they are actually outgrowths of a single cell, and the small diameter. You can get a lot of them in there, and you can have a lot of water absorption. Now, of course, there's all kinds of different roots. depending upon where the plant came from. Yes, sir.
Now with mycorrhizae, that relationship, does mycorrhizae attach to the root hairs, or does it attach into more of the more mature portion of the root?
Well, the mycorrhizae actually infiltrate the root,
Okay.
and then they form, and we'll actually talk about that when we talk about nitrogen. Then they actually infiltrate the root, and they form structures in the root. And there's this notion that they increase the efficiency, but whether it does or not is really open to debate. Okay, it does a lot. There's a lot of plus. There's a lot of work that says it increases water uptake efficiency, but only from a couple of labs. So it may or may not. It's mostly for nitrogen.
I was just wondering where it generally was found, at more of the growing tip of the root, or if it was back further.
I don't know. I don't really know what part of the root it penetrates.
Okay.
I think it may be more in toward the more mature root, but it actually penetrates and starts a lot of biochemical processes to cause the cells to actually start differentiating into the structures. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
That's what mycorrhizae does. And this, I think, is a picture. And there are people, of course, that look at this, and you've got a lot of things going on. The soil type, the ability of the root hair to work its way between the particles, regardless of how much water you've got. And all these things, of course, are important in terms of getting water into the plant. And with that, I think I'm going to stop today. Are there any questions? Okay, we'll pick up Wednesday on water potential.